안녕하세요.
Nightfall envelops Seoul, its dazzling lights reflecting on the rain-slicked asphalt. In one of the city's most luxurious buildings, a corporate reception brought together business moguls and heirs of South Korea's most powerful families. Among the guests, Kang Ji-hoon, the rebellious heir of the mighty Kang Group, wandered through the hall, utterly uninterested in the event. He adjusted the button of his dark blazer, bored by the forced pleasantries and the scrutinizing gazes of the business elite. And then, he saw her. In the corner of the hall, dressed in a simple yet elegant black dress, Han Sua studied the tray of appetizers discreetly, as if debating whether they were worth taking. Her hair was delicately tied up, with a few loose strands framing her face just as Ji-hoon remembered. His heart skipped a beat. 8 years had passed, yet there she was. Before he could stop himself, his feet were already leading him toward her. Han Sua. His voice was low, but firm. Sua froze for a moment. Then, slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes, once filled with dreams and unspoken promises, now held a cautious gleam. "Kang Ji-hoon," she replied, her voice soft yet laden with unspoken emotions. "It's been a long time." He smirked, a hint of irony on his lips. 8 years, 4 months, and he paused intentionally, letting the suspense linger. A few days. Sua raised an eyebrow. "You counted the days?" "I just have a good memory." She let out a small laugh, though it carried a trace of melancholy. They stood there, locked in a gaze that measured the depth of the distance between them. Ji-hoon noticed something different about her. It wasn't just the maturity in her eyes, but the way she carried herself, as if she had learned to build invisible walls around her. "Are you doing well?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. Sua averted her gaze, staring at the champagne glass in her hand. "I suppose so. And you?" "I've been better." "I bet." She smirked, but her eyes glimmered with irony. After all, the rebellious heir has finally come home. Ji-hoon exhaled sharply. He didn't want to talk about it, about the fights with his father, about the failure of his attempt at independence, about the weight he had been carrying on his shoulders ever since he returned. "Did you know I'd be here?" he asked, changing the subject. Sua traced the rim of her glass absent-mindedly, in no rush to answer. "I had no idea." He didn't believe her. Something in her expression told him this encounter wasn't entirely coincidental. Maybe she had suspected it. Maybe she had even wished it wouldn't happen. Ji-hoon took a step closer, closing the space between them. "Then why do you seem like you were already prepared for this?" She chuckled but didn't reply. Instead, she raised her glass in a silent toast to the past, took a small sip, and then stepped back. "It was nice seeing you, Ji-hoon." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ji-hoon remained still, watching her leave. A strange chill settled in his chest, an unease he couldn't quite name. The only thing he knew for sure was that this reunion had been anything but a coincidence. A cafe in the heart of Seoul was relatively empty that night, illuminated by the soft amber glow of the hanging lamps. Han Sua drummed her fingers against her coffee cup, not really drinking, her mind wandering back to the unexpected encounter with Kang Ji-hoon. 8 years since he had vanished from her life without a word, and now there he was acting as if time had stood still. The sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts. When she looked up, her body tensed. Ji-hoon stood at the entrance, scanning the cafe until his eyes locked onto hers. Without hesitation, he strode over and sat down across from her. "Did you follow me?" Sua asked, crossing her arms. "I prefer to think of it as fate," Ji-hoon replied with a lopsided smile. She let out a sigh, turning her gaze back to her cup. 8 years, Ji-hoon. Not a letter, not a message, nothing. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly uncomfortable. "I know it seems unforgivable," he began, but Sua cut him off. "Seems?" Her eyes met his, filled with hurt and indignation. "You just disappeared. After everything we planned together." Ji-hoon took a deep breath before answering. "I had to leave. My father, he gave me an ultimatum. Either I followed the family's plans, or I was cut off from everything." "And you chose your family?" Sua let out a humorless laugh, like always. Ji-hoon lowered his gaze, staring at the table as if searching for the right words. I was young, a coward. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? Sua repeated, incredulous. You think abandoning me without an explanation was a form of protection? Silence settled between them. The clock on the wall marked each second, a cruel reminder of everything they had lost. I never stopped thinking about you, Ji-hoon murmured, his voice heavy with regret. Sua closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to ignore the tightening in her chest. She didn't want to hear this, not after so much time, not after she had spent years rebuilding her life without him. She grabbed her bag and stood up. It doesn't change anything, Ji-hoon. Her voice was firm, though tinged with sadness. The past can't be undone. He watched her leave, a sense of helplessness washing over him. But one thing was certain, wasn't going to let this be the end of the conversation. The next morning brought a soft sunlight that bathed the buildings of Seoul, reflecting off the windows of the towering skyscrapers. Han Sua walked into the office with steady steps, trying to ignore the unease that had lingered since the night before. She knew she shouldn't let Kang Ji-hoon affect her, but his sudden presence reopened wounds she had convinced herself were healed. As she crossed the reception area, she felt furtive glances from her colleagues. The murmur was subtle, yet present. Something was going on. When she reached her desk, she found a bouquet of white lilies carefully placed beside her monitor. A small note accompanied the flowers. Not everything has to be like before. Can we start over? Ji-hoon. Her heart gave an involuntary jolt. Looks like you have an admirer, Han Sua. Min, Ji's voice, her coworker, carried a mix of curiosity and mischief. Sua quickly grabbed the note, crumpling it before any more speculation could arise. It's nothing, just an old acquaintance, she replied, keeping her tone indifferent. But Ji-hoon didn't seem willing to let her escape so easily. By mid-afternoon, while she was reviewing important documents, the door to the conference room swung open, revealing Ji-hoon's familiar silhouette. Dressed in a flawless suit, he exuded confidence, but his eyes sought only hers. Do you have a minute? He asked, completely ignoring the curious gazes of everyone around. Sua hesitated but stood up, following him into a more private room. As soon as the door closed, she hissed, What do you think you're doing? Ji-hoon gave a faint smile. I'm trying to fix what I broke. By sending flowers to my workplace? Making everyone talk? Is this how you plan to make things right? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I didn't plan for it to become public, but if it means I get another chance to talk to you, then it was worth it. Sua shook her head, trying to hold on to her anger, but the truth was, her conviction was starting to waver. Some things can't just be undone, Ji-hoon. He took a step forward, but stopped just before crossing the invisible barrier between them. And what if I want to try anyway? Silence hung between them. Sua felt her heart falter, but she couldn't give him an answer. Not here, not yet. I need to get back to work. Her voice was low but firm. Ji-hoon simply nodded, but before she could leave, he said, I'll wait for your answer, Sua, however long it takes. She walked out without looking back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that deep down, a part of her wanted to believe him. The sharp night wind blew through the streets of Seoul, carrying with it a tension that hung heavy between Han Sua and Kang Ji-hoon. After days of avoiding the inevitable conversation, she had finally given in to his persistent requests to meet. Now, they stood face to face on one of the company's terraces, the city lights twinkling behind them, silently witnessing this decisive moment. Sua crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from the cold and from the storm raging within her. Ji-hoon, why are we here? Her voice was firm, but there was a slight tremor in it that he didn't miss. Ji-hoon rubbed his hands together as if seeking the courage for what he was about to say. His gaze was distant, but the determination on his face made it clear that he wouldn't back down. Because you deserve to know the truth. She raised an eyebrow, skeptical. The truth? You disappear for years, suddenly show up out of nowhere, chase me around with grand gestures, and now you want to talk about the truth? Ji-hoon swallowed hard. He knew she had every right to be furious, but he had to say it before it was too late. I left because of my father. He threatened to destroy your family if I stayed with you. The silence that followed was deafening. Suah blinked a few times, unable to process his words. What? Her voice came out low, almost inaudible. Ji-hoon looked down, trying to organize his thoughts before continuing. He found out about us. He said you would never be accepted into our family. He said he would do anything to keep us apart. Ji-hoon's voice faltered between words, thick with pain and regret. At the time, I had no power to fight back. He threatened me, Suah. He said he could ruin your family's reputation, make your father lose his job, discredit your mother. Suah felt a bitter taste in her mouth. All those years of pain, of abandonment, of unanswered questions. All because one man decided she wasn't worthy. And you just left? Without fighting? Without even telling me? The pain in her voice now mingled with anger. Ji-hoon closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I was young, Suah, and weak. I thought that if I disappeared, you could move on without suffering even more. I was wrong. She let out a humorless laugh, taking a step back. And you really think that spared me from suffering? Ji-hoon had no answer. All he could do was stare into her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, and feel the crushing weight of the mistake he had made. I'm not asking you to forgive me. His voice was now only a whisper, but I wanted you to know that I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped loving you. Suah clenched her fists, trying to hold herself together, but inside, her heart was at war. How could she ignore all the sleepless nights she had spent wondering what had happened? How could she simply accept that her fate had been decided by someone else, without even being given the chance to fight? You say you love me, she murmured, her voice unsteady. But love also means trusting someone enough to share your fears. You didn't give me that chance, Ji-hoon. You didn't let me decide if I wanted to stand by your side, even knowing the danger. Ji-hoon felt the impact of her words like a blow. He knew there was no justification that could erase the years of pain he had caused, but he also knew he couldn't lose Suah again. He took a step toward her, hesitating. I know I made a mistake, but tell me, Suah, is there still a chance for us? The silence that followed stretched into what felt like an eternity. Suah looked at him, her eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, disappearing through the terrace door. Ji-hoon remained there, staring at the empty space where she had stood. His heart told him this wasn't the end. But this time, he knew it was her choice to make. The autumn rains intensified over Seoul, cloaking the city in a melancholic glow. Suah hurried through the streets, her mind still trapped in Kang Ji-hoon's words. The truth he had revealed weighed heavily on her heart, leaving her torn between a past she couldn't change and a future she wasn't sure she wanted to accept. On the other side of the city, Ji-hoon sat in the Kang Group's conference room. His eyes were fixed on the glass table, but his mind was elsewhere. His father was talking about business expansion, strategic alliances, but Ji-hoon wasn't listening. His world had been suspended ever since he had watched Suah walk away without answering his question. It was only when silence filled the room that he realized everyone was staring at him. Ji-hoon, do you agree with the contract? Kang-hyun, Su's stern voice pulled him back to reality. He blinked, taking a second to gather his thoughts before responding. Give me some time to review the details. His voice came out cold, but his mind had already made a decision. By late afternoon, Ji-hoon left the Kang Group building and drove straight to the neighborhood where Suah lived. He maneuvered through the bustling streets and stopped in front of the cafe she often visited. And there she was, sitting near the window, lost in thought. He took a deep breath before stepping inside. The door chime rang, and Suah looked up. Their eyes met, and for an instant, time seemed to slow. Can we talk, he asked, keeping his distance, respecting her space. Suah hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Ji-hoon sat across from her, noticing the exhaustion in her eyes. I know it's still hard for you to trust me again, he began, his voice sincere, but I'm not running away anymore. I won't let other people decide my fate. I want to be with you, no matter what happens. Suah bit her lower lip, her heart waging a war against her logic. How can I be sure of that? How do I know you won't leave me again? Ji-hoon met her gaze deeply, trying to convey everything he felt without words. Because now I know what it means to lose you, and I won't make the same mistake twice. The rain outside continued to fall, creating a soft melody that filled the silence between them. Suah closed her eyes for a moment and sighed, feeling the weight of the decision looming over her. The rain had stopped, but the scent of wet earth still lingered in the air. Hansuah and Kang Ji-hoon walked side by side, neither speaking a word. The illuminated streets of Seoul were quiet that night, mirroring the silence between them. Their footsteps echoed against the damp asphalt, and the cold breeze sent a faint shiver through the tension that hung between them. Ji-hoon was the first to break the silence. "If you tell me you want me to disappear for good, I will. But if there's even the smallest chance, I want to fight for us." Suah stopped walking and turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with conflicting emotions. The love she felt for Ji-hoon was still there, but the wounds of the past wouldn't fade so easily. "I spent years trying to forget you," she said, her voice soft yet firm, "convincing myself that you were never coming back, that I had to move on." Ji-hoon took a step closer but respected the space between them. "And did you?" he asked, his voice laced with both hope and fear. Suah looked away for a moment. Her heart pounded in her chest. Finally, she took a deep breath and met his gaze again. "Number." The confession came out as a whisper. "But that doesn't mean I can just forget everything that happened." Ji-hoon nodded slowly. He knew that love alone wasn't enough to erase the mistakes of the past, but he also knew he couldn't give up on her. "I don't want you to forget. I just want you to give me a chance to prove that I can be better, that I can stand by your side no matter what comes our way." The wind blew gently, tousling the loose strands of Suah's hair. She closed her eyes for a moment and let out a faint smile. "If you truly want to fight for us, then prove it." Ji-hoon smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. He knew that this moment wasn't the end. It was just a new beginning. He hesitated before extending his hand, careful not to cross the invisible line between them. Suah glanced at his outstretched hand for a moment, before sighing and turning away to continue walking. But Ji-hoon didn't step back. He knew that if he gave up now, he would never get a second chance. "Suah." His voice reached her before she could walk too far. "At least let me show you that I can be different." She stopped, closing her eyes for a brief moment. Why, after everything, did she still feel that tightness in her chest? Why couldn't she just turn her back and walk away? "I can't promise you anything, Ji-hoon," she finally said, without turning around. "But maybe I can see for myself if you've really changed." His heart pounded. It wasn't a definitive answer, but it was a chance, and he would hold on to that chance with everything he had. The city of Seoul shimmered behind them, lighting the path toward the future they were about to build together.
You're my eternal